Hello and welcome to Freed Indeed Live. I'm your host, Kevin J.N. Hughes, and today I'm going to be talking about elephant, the elephant in the room, so to speak, or at least it's treated as kind of an elephant in the room by a lot of people, and that is the so-called elephant poem, which is supposed to be a poem about God, but it's um, honestly kind of a goofy poem. But we're gonna talk about it. A lot of people think that it's super um, what do you call it? Profound, and I don't think it's very profound. But I'll talk about why. So let me find. Oh, it's harder to find than I thought it would be because I want to actually have us read it together. Uh-huh. So basically, um, here we go. Maybe is this? Sorry, I'm. Well, anyway, so basically, the point of the poem. I think this is the right one. Let's see. So, anyway, before we get into it, I want to let you guys know if you support what we're doing here at Freed Indeed Ministries, then take a look at the link in the description below. You can support Freed Indeed Ministries. I also want to tell you guys about Share the Faith Ministries. They are doing really great work supporting um, priests and who are working in the missionary endeavors. So definitely support that organization if you can. Support Freed Indeed Ministries and check out our new Etsy store, which is Invictus Christi. So, which is Latin, it means the unconquerable Christ. So Invictus Christi is basically 100% of the proceeds from Invictus Christi supports um well, it supports our work, it supports it helps support the church, it supports my family. It's a good thing that you're giving your money to Invictus Christi, and it's just a profound thing. So um in the blind so today we're going to talk about the blind man or the blind men and the elephant. This is a poem that I had to study when I was in university, and I'm sorry it took me a minute to find. It's just the poem is it's longer than I remember it being from when I was in university, so I apologize that that I wasn't more prepared for that for you guys. But anyway, so the poem, the kind of importance of it is people say that this is supposed to be a poem that reveals something to us about God. It's supposed to mean, well, I'll go through it. So, there were 6 men of Indostan to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against his broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl, God bless me, but the elephant is very like a wall. The second, feeling the tusk, cried, "Ho, what have we here? So round and smooth and sharp. To me 'tis very clear, this wonder of an elephant is very like a spear." The third approached the animal, and happening to take the squirming trunk within his hands, thus boldly up he spake, "I see," quoth he, "the elephant is very like a snake." The fourth reached out an eager hand, and felt about the knee. "What the most wondrous beast is like is very plain," quoth he, "'tis clear enough the elephant is very like a tree." The fifth, who chanced to touch the ear, said, "Even the blindest man can tell what this resembleth most. Deny the fact who can. This marvel of an elephant is very like a fan." The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grope, than seizing on the swinging tail that fell within his scope, "I see," quoth he, "the elephant is very like a rope." And so these men of Indostan disputed loud and long, each with his own opinion, exceeding stiff and strong. Though each was partly in the right, they all were in the wrong. So often theologic wars, the disputants, I ween, rail on in ignorance of what each other man, and prate about an elephant that none of them has ever seen. So this poem is one that gets quoted. As I said, I had to study it in university, and the kind of takeaway that you're supposed to get is that, this is what it's like when people talk about God. They talk about God, but they don't really know what they're talking about, and since they don't really know what they're talking about, they are just sort of saying things, and everybody's got a little bit of the truth, but nobody is completely right. And that's kind of the point that these people want to make. But Kevin DeYoung, a Presbyterian minister, has a book which I think is actually right behind me on my shelf somewhere. Yep. Um, Taking God at His Word. Taking God at His Word. Right there on my top shelf. I don't know if you can see it there. Um, Taking God at His Word by Kevin DeYoung. He says in that book something that I think is helpful, but I don't think his answer I don't think his answer embraces the full picture, and I'll explain why. But I'll start by saying his answer to the poem. So, his answer to the poem is that the poem fails to take into account all of the details. And he's correct about that. So, in the poem, it makes a couple of presuppositions, a couple of assumptions about God and man. So, one of the assumptions that the poem makes is that man is blind and can't really discern God. That's one of the assumptions that it makes. It also makes the assumption that God, and Kevin DeYoung rightly recognizes that the poem makes the assumption that God does not concern himself with man. It's a very deistic kind of perspective where God is just sort of letting all of these different people have their theological opinions, but like the elephant, he doesn't care. Kevin DeYoung says the poem changes radically if you take into account that the elephant opens his mouth and speaks and says, "You're holding my nose, my trunk, you're holding my knee, you're holding this other part." Sorry, one of my cats is acting crazy down here. Um, anyway, "You're holding this, you're doing that. Um, and this is what I'm really like," and then proceeds to describe himself. So, and Kevin DeYoung's point is that that's what the Bible is. The Bible is God reaching down and sort of explaining himself to mankind. Kevin DeYoung is right as far as it goes, and I think that that's a good sort of answer to a point. But there comes a problem, and that problem is that, as my friend Patrick loves to point out, the Bible isn't the only um, the the Bible. Well, actually, I'll go a step further because my friend Patrick is actually incorrect as well. But I will address what Kevin DeYoung is saying, because the problem with what Kevin DeYoung is saying is that it assumes that Christianity is a text based religion based on the Bible, which it is not. And I have a whole video about that. I have a whole video called "The Bible is Not the Christian Quran." So I would encourage you to check that video out. I'm not going to rehash everything I said in that video, but the conclusion from that video, that's very plain, is that Christianity is not a text-based religion. Christianity is not based on the Bible, but rather the Bible is a collection of Christian books. Um, so yes, the Bible is inspired, and the Bible does reveal things about God to us, but the Bible is the product, if you will, of the church. So anyway, we're not going to rehash all of that. If you want to see my discussion on that, check out "The Bible is Not the Christian Quran." But what I want to say about the elephant poem is that in order for the elephant poem, so the elephant poem is absolutely false. And the reason the elephant poem is absolutely false is because it actually is telling a lie about God. It's saying that God doesn't care about us. Like the elephant is indifferent to the people groping about different parts of him. This is how the poem is explaining God. In the analogy of the poem, it's portraying God as indifferent to the fact that human beings don't know him. But that's not actually true. So, if you want to make the elephant poem actually true, here's what it would have to be: take the elephant out of the poem, and instead you have many more than six. You have a multitude of people who are all blind. And God sees them, and God takes pity upon them, and God has mercy for them, and God sets his love upon these poor, miserable, blind people. And so God becomes a man, and that man is Christ Jesus. And Christ Jesus walks out among the blind people and says, "O you blind men, come and follow me, and I will give you sight." And some of the blind men, unfortunately, don't hear him at all. So they don't follow him. They don't hear the call. For some of them, it's because they're really, really far away, and none of the other blind men who do hear the call manage to um, let them know, and so they never hear about it. But for more often, it's the case that it's not so much that they couldn't hear, but that they wouldn't hear. More often, it's the case that it was the competing voices of the world that drowned out the voice of God. When God said, "Come and follow me, and I will give you sight," that a lot of people could have heard him, but were too busy listening to the vain things of this world, trying to make money. They were in the marketplace, and they just didn't hear him because his voice got drowned out by other voices. They were too busy trying to make money, trying to become wealthy, trying to do big things. There were even some of them, unfortunately, who didn't hear him because they were in church, or in a temple, and in the temple they were listening to false teachers, tell them things about God that weren't true. Say, no, 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 don't listen to him. Listen to me. I'll show you the way. But they didn't realize that that person was blind too. He couldn't see God, he didn't know God, and he couldn't show them the way. And so then those blind people didn't hear him, or they did hear him, but they weren't listening because they were too busy listening to the voice of a stranger and being led by other blind men. And they didn't know they were blind, but they were. So that's kind of the first group, is the group that for one reason or another didn't hear him when he called. Again, for some of them, it wasn't totally their fault. They couldn't hear him, and it was kind of the fault of some of the people who did hear, who could have told them, but didn't. So that was a problem. But the vast majority of the time, it was not that. The vast majority of the time, it was that they could have heard him, but they weren't really listening to him. They were listening to something else. So that's the first category. The second category is those who heard the call, they got excited, and they said, okay, I'll get to see God. And so they start groping after him, but very quickly they discern that the road that he's leading them on is very difficult and makes requirements of them. But they also see that their eyes are starting to be opened. Their eyes are starting to be opened, and they're starting to see, and they get these vague kind of glimpses of him as they're trying to follow him. Um, but but the road is too difficult and the way is too steep, and they don't really trust that he's got their best interests in mind, and so they kind of gradually start to depart from the way, and they take the little bit of vision that they've been given and assume that it's kind of the whole picture. And some of them even go as far as they start doing their own thing. They start their own temples and expound upon the vision that they've had, and these ones are the most similar to the ones in the elephant poem, because they have sort of a fuzzy picture, but it's not the full vision. But there were others. There's a third group, and this third group, they heard the call and they follow. And the way is difficult, but they realize that his promise is coming true. They start to be able to see. And so they keep climbing, they keep groping and climbing, and it's difficult and it's dirty and there's mud everywhere and it's hard and they can't, and it's steep and it's narrow, and sometimes they have to get on their hands and knees and kind of crawl under an overpass, and and the way he's leading them on it doesn't seem to make any sense. He's making demands of them that seem contrary to what they assumed God was like, to what they assumed the world was like. Um, and so, but they keep going. They keep striving after him. They keep following him. And these ones more and more realize that their eyes are opened more and more, and the vision becomes clearer and clearer. And some of those ones, okay, who are following him like that, some of them start to get really close to him and start to see him very clearly. And those ones start to be able to actually call others and say, I've seen this amazing vision of him," and start calling others to them. Well, now, some of the ones who either refused to come at all, or who had their own temples going, or who started their own things based on their sort of opaque visions, some of those ones start killing the ones who have been following him and have had their eyes opened. They start killing them because what they're saying contradicts what they've been saying here. But that doesn't deter, and when they start killing them, let's be honest, some of the people who are on the way, they see that, and that's another difficulty. But the ones who endure, the ones who keep pressing on this difficult journey, this path, their eyes get more opened and they see more clearly. And they say, no, I'm never going to forsake this wonderful God who's revealed himself. And so they keep following, they keep pressing, and they get the vision too. And then they start proclaiming it. And some of the ones who've been killing them, they get back on the path. Or they get on the path for the first time. Some of these people who didn't hear the call at first, they now hear the call and they're like, oh, I see it. And they start on the path. And again, some of them depart, and again, some of them can't make it the whole way because they depart, or because of their they prefer, some people even prefer blindness rather than sight. um that's an unfortunate thing too, that there's people who choose to be blind, rather than believe what is true. But in the end, there are many blind people who come and they follow Jesus and they receive their sight and they are healed and they are brought into relationship. They don't just see the vision of God, but they're brought into relationship with God, and they become one with him, and um they are conformed to him. And this is what I believe is the true poem. The elephant thing is mistaken because it assumes that God doesn't care, but God cares very much. The elephant thing is mistaken because it assumes that everybody's view of God is equally valid, but everybody's view of God being equally valid can only be true if God is the indifferent elephant who cares not to correct the the problem of people not knowing him. But that is not true. And if you worship a God who's indifferent, then you worship a false God. What is true is that God loves humanity and has given himself for humanity and united himself to humanity in such a way that we can know him. So thank you very much for watching. God bless, and share this with your friends so that they too can be freed indeed.